Welcome to a very special edition of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237 Teamsters. Today, our very special guest is United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here.
This is your second time. Welcome back to the show. You were actually our second guest back in 2010, January 2010. We thank you for coming back.
Thank you.
In the Senate since January 2009, so much has taken place during the past 3 years. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your work to help improve the economy, end the recession, and stimulate the growth, especially here in New York.
Well, you know, as I travel around New York, the number one issue that New Yorkers talk about is how tough the economy is and that they really need jobs. They need to be able to provide for their families. And so what we can do in Washington is create a better landscape for people to create jobs. Government doesn't create them. People do. It's their ideas. It's their businesses. It's small businesses. It's manufacturing. So what I've tried to do is improve that landscape in a couple of ways. We have 3 bills that I'm trying to pass this year that I think would make a big difference. One, we want to see more made in America. We want to see more U.S.-based manufacturing. And if we can reward our manufacturers for creating those jobs through tax policy, it's a good thing. It's a good investment. And that's a core common value we all share. I also think, you know, we could do so much work in rebuilding our infrastructure, whether it's traditional infrastructure like roads, bridges, or sewers, or new infrastructure like high-speed rail or rural broadband or healthcare IT or a new electric grid. All of those investments are long-term job creators. Creates jobs immediately to build it, but also allows for growth throughout the economy. And the last idea is small businesses. Small businesses create 2/3 of all new jobs. We have so many entrepreneurs and innovators in our state. We can really create terrific economic growth by helping our small businesses get loans, by easing the paperwork they have to do, streamlining it, and making sure there's tax policy that reflects the need to reinvest in those small businesses.
You know, there's actually estimated $3 trillion in union pension funds across this country. We could invest some of that money into infrastructure. I think that's a great idea. That's the way Labor can partner with the government to create jobs and also fix our infrastructure in the economy.
That's exactly what I want to do. I think if we can create an infrastructure bank, a committee that will analyze long-term, large-scale infrastructure projects and take a little bit of federal seed money and then allow the private sector to invest, to allow the pension funds to get longer-term returns for their pension fund and also be the economic engine for this infrastructure renewal. It's a great partnership. Life insurance companies can invest. Private equity can invest. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines that can come off the sidelines and go right into our economy through these long-term investments. And so if we can create that infrastructure bank, I think it's a nonpartisan idea. It's just a plain old good idea that I think can get done. And New York needs it. We have so many unmet infrastructure needs. And, you know, for your listeners on Long Island, one of the challenges we have there, high property taxes. And it's also true for Westchester and upstate New York. And oftentimes the driver of high property taxes are basically needing to invest in infrastructure. There's no other way to pay for it. So if the federal government can take that off the local taxpayer books, it'll make a big difference in lowering taxes.
Now, I know across this country and even in the state, working people have been taking a beating as if they were the cause of this great collapse in our economy. Having infrastructure investment, and I've been saying this for at least 3 years now, is one way, instead of scaling pensions back, instead of trying to destroy pensions, this is one way that pensions can work for America and people can see what we get out of pensions.
Absolutely. Because pension funds are hundreds of billions of dollars, and they need to be invested because you have to create a return rate for the retirees. What better way can you think of than being the investor, the equity investor into these long-term, large-scale projects where there are ratepayers? There is a revenue stream that comes for them. So whether it's building sewer systems and you have ratepayers, or whether you're building high-speed rail and you have train riders, that's a real opportunity for economic growth.
And what are some of the other proposals you support besides infrastructure to create jobs?
You know, we have to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of America and make it easier for companies to do what they do best, which is create jobs, which is build things and create products that people want to buy. So there's a lot of ways to do that. One of the easiest ways on the federal level is to make tax policy better for companies. So if you're a manufacturer, giving you a tax credit for every Made in America job you create, a 30% tax credit would make a big difference. If you're an entrepreneur, having a $10,000 tax credit for every startup, so you don't have to pay taxes right away when you're just starting out, that makes a big difference. So using tax policy is a way to allow businesses to reinvest. A small company, when they buy things for their company, property, plant, or equipment, allowing them to deduct that all up front as opposed to the life of the property or plants that or equipment that you just bought. It's just a way to reinvest. So those are the kinds of things I can work on the federal level to help small businesses and our manufacturers and our farms continue to create jobs.
You've done so much in the Senate to help women continue to have affordable health care and also protect against domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And we want to thank you for that fight. Can you just share with us some of your trials and tribulations and just trying to keep that access to women's health care? Because I know the right-wing Republicans try to eliminate that.
Yes. One of my concerns over the last few years has been this Republican leadership in the House of Representatives have made an overwhelming effort to undermine women's access to basic health care, basic rights. There's been an effort to defund programs that are safety nets for women and children at risk. H.R. 3, the third bill introduced by this House of Representatives, was to defund Title X. They said it was about abortion. Federal money does not pay for abortions. It hasn't done so in 30 years. That was the red herring. What they were defunding was prenatal care, was pre-cancer screenings, and basic health care for at-risk women. They also made efforts to defund things as simple as nutrition for women and infants, and food stamps, and families at a risk to have food security. That doesn't reflect American values. It doesn't reflect who we are. And so one of the things I've been trying to do, Greg, is get more women active in politics. I really believe that if more women's voices were heard, we would have better outcomes. One of the most startling images we saw recently is when the House of Representatives held a hearing on contraception, and the first panel had no women. So if you want to talk about women not having a voice, there was no more clear example than that. On an issue so fundamental, 99% of women have taken contraception in their lifetimes, but the one hearing on the issue, the first panel did not have one female voice.
When was the first panel held?
It was just about a month ago, and it was one of the most egregious examples of women not being heard. And so I've created a call to action to ask women to be heard, to ask them to vote, to ask them to be advocates on the issues they care about, and also to ask them to run for office. We only have 17% women in Congress. We only have 6 women governors. And I believe that when women's voices are heard at the table, they complement male voices. They look at problems differently, from a different experience, a different life experience, from a different perspective. And oftentimes, women in government can make a difference because they're very good at consensus building. They listen, they see what the problem is, they find the common ground and bring people together. And even anecdotally, in my own experience, for each of the bills I've worked so hard on to pass, oftentimes it's been a Republican woman on the other side of the aisle who's been helping me pass that legislation. So it was Susan Collins standing right there passing Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. It was Lisa Murkowski working behind the scenes to help many of us pass the 9/11 health bill. Just recently, we passed the Stock Act, a really simple piece of legislation that says members of Congress can't engage in insider trading. Again, Susan Collins led the charge. It's pretty remarkable, but I feel that if more women could get engaged in politics through advocacy, through voting, through being heard, our outcomes would be better, our agenda would be different, we would solve problems differently.
That's a shame, because when Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the Congress, she included everyone. And you tell me John Boehner had a hearing and there was not one woman on the panel. Not on the first
panel. It was terrible. And Carolyn Maloney walked out and said, "Where are the women?" And I think that was important because she was offended, as are all of us.
Yes.
And then you know the story. One woman who did ask to be on that panel was then spoken of so poorly and so aggressively on radio shows.
Yes.
And I think that kind of rhetoric needs to be decried, and people need to stand up against it.
Actually, I thought that was a replay from the 1940s, I heard. I didn't realize that was 2012. The attacks on working men and women across this country has taken a turn, and I would say for the worst. This presidential election, all I hear is we have to get rid of unions. We have to get rid of people. We have to get rid of their rights, and we need more right-to-work states. I actually had a senator send a letter to my house asking for money to help get rid of union bosses.
Really?
And I made copies of that letter. I said, this is funny. They're sending letters to my house.
Funny.
What do you think when you hear attacks on working men and women?
Well, I think it's misplaced, and I think it's egregious. The union movement in this country has been the voice for working families, the voice for workers' rights, to make sure workers receive fair pay for the work they do, to make sure workers can work in a safe work environment, to make sure we have environmental standards, to make sure we don't have child labor. It's what makes America's workforce so strong. To have those voices be part of decision-making and policy-making in Washington is really fundamental because, everyday workers don't have fancy lobbyists going to Washington on their behalf. If they can at least have a union who can speak for them collectively, that can make a difference. It can make a difference on making sure their voice is heard. And frankly, that's what our democracy is based on. Our democracy is all about average, everyday people being heard, being represented, and being able to be part of decision-making.
You've been listening to Reaching Out with Gregory Floyd. I'm President Local 237. Our very special guest was Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Okay.